$2. That is all Mia Vasquez had left in the world when the knife tore through her ribs. The fluorescent lights of the community shelter flicker overhead, casting everything in a sickly white glow that makes the hallway look like the inside of a dying machine. Mia stands with her hand on Sophie's shoulder, the 7-year-old girl pressed against her left side, trembling. Sophie's small fingers curl into the fabric of Mia's threadbare jacket, the one she has worn for 3 winters, the wool matted and thin as tissue paper at the elbows. The man appears at the end of the corridor like a nightmare given flesh. He is tall, gaunt, with wild eyes that have seen too many substances and not enough sleep. His name is Derek Vance, and he is screaming. "That's my daughter. That's my child." His voice cracks like breaking glass. His left hand grips a hunting knife. The blade is 7 inches long, serrated, the kind used to field dress animals. Rain has soaked his clothes, darkening them to the color of bruises. "She's coming with me." Sophie's breathing stops. Her entire body goes rigid against Mia's leg. Mia does not think. She does not calculate odds or consider consequences. She simply moves. Her right arm wraps around Sophie's waist and she pivots, placing her own body between the child and the man with the knife like a door that will not open. "She is not going anywhere," Mia says. Her voice is steady. It is barely a whisper, but it carries the weight of something immovable. "She stays here." Derek Vance charges forward. His footsteps thunder against the linoleum floor. His breathing is ragged, animal-like, the sound of something cornered and violent. The knife comes up, his arm rising like a weapon being loaded. Mia does not step back. The blade enters her body at an angle, piercing through her ribs just below her left breast. The sensation is not pain at first. It is pressure. It is wrongness. It is the sound her own body makes when something essential is being torn apart, a wet, dull noise like a watermelon splitting open on concrete. Sophie screams. A sound so raw, so pure in its terror, that 3 shelter workers come running from the office. Derek Vance withdraws the knife and flees, his footsteps receding into the November night. He disappears like smoke. Mia's hand finds her side. When her fingers come away, they are wet with blood, not the dark maroon of a movie, but bright red, almost luminous in the fluorescent light. The color of emergency. The color of something leaving her body that she cannot get back. "Mia? Mia?" Sophie's voice cracks her name like thin ice. "Mia, the red is coming. The red is coming out." Mia staggers backward into the hallway, her vision beginning to tunnel at the edges. The fluorescent lights seem impossibly bright now, each one a small sun burning into her retinas. Her legs no longer answer her commands. She makes it to the emergency exit, the door with the metal bar and the sign that says the alarm will sound if opened, and pushes through. The November rain hits her like a slap. It is cold and relentless, each droplet a small shock against her burning skin. The street outside the shelter is empty except for parked cars and a 7-Eleven 2 blocks down, its neon sign reflected in the wet pavement like a pink and blue bruise spreading across the asphalt. Philadelphia in November is a city of grays and blacks, all the warmth leached from the world. Mia's knees buckle. She collapses on the sidewalk, her back against the rough concrete of the shelter wall, rain mixing with blood, her threadbare jacket spreading beneath her like broken wings. Her breathing comes in shallow gasps. The world tilts. This is when the black Mercedes appears. It comes from the direction of Broad Street, moving fast, its headlights cutting through the rain like knives. The car screeches to a stop, its tires squealing against the wet pavement. The sound echoes off the surrounding buildings like a scream. Through her fading vision, Mia sees polished shoes first. Italian leather, the kind that costs more than a month of her shelter work. A man emerges from the driver's side, and behind him, 2 more figures. They move with the synchronized precision of people trained to interpret a single look from their leader. The man is tall, at least 6'2", with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar that runs from below his left eye to his jawline like an accusation. His face is angular, aristocratic, the kind of face that belongs to someone who has never been told no. He wears a cashmere coat in charcoal grey, the fabric so fine it seems to absorb the November rain rather than repel it. A coat worth more than everything Mia owned in the world. His eyes find her, and something shifts in his chest, a sensation like a blade turning. "Call an ambulance," he says. His voice is deep and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that moves men without question. "Tell them we have a penetrating abdominal wound, possible liver involvement. We need St. Mary's trauma unit. Tell them Nicholas Rossi is bringing her in." The men move without hesitation, one of them already pulling a phone from his jacket pocket, already speaking into it with the language of emergency rooms and favors owed. Nicholas Rossi kneels beside Mia, a gesture his men have never witnessed in 15 years of service. His coat trails in the blood pooling beneath her body. He looks at her hand, still pressed against her side, and then at her face. "What is your name?" he asks. "Mia," she whispers. The sound is barely there, like a candle in the wind. "Mia Vasquez." "Mia Vasquez," he repeats, as if committing it to memory. "You are going to live." That is not a request. That is a command. Strong arms lift her, not rough or clinical like an ambulance stretcher would be, but cradling, as if she is something precious that might break. The car door opens. She is lowered into the back seat that smells of leather and expensive cologne and something else, something that smells like power. Through her closing eyes, she sees rain streaming down the window. She sees the reflection of neon signs. She sees Nicholas Ross's scarred face hovering above hers as he speaks rapid instructions to people who answer immediately. She does not see Sophie watching from the shelter doorway, her small face pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks. She does not know that Sophie is the most valuable person in Philadelphia. She does not know that this child has been missing for 7 years, that she has been hidden by people willing to commit any cruelty to keep her hidden, that she is the key to an empire worth $40 million. She does not know that her own stepfather, Anthony Marchetti, a man who drained her inheritance, forged her signature, but what she did not know was that in 30 seconds, her entire life would change direction. That in 3 weeks, 2 men would be systematically destroyed through the machinery they believed they controlled. That in 6 months, she would stand beside the most dangerous man in Philadelphia as an equal, not as someone rescued, and speak the words he had waited to hear, that family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now, let us go back to the beginning, to 3 weeks earlier, when Mia still had a car that sometimes started if you pumped the accelerator and said a prayer to a god she had stopped believing in. 3 weeks earlier. October. A Tuesday. 4:30 in the morning. The car is a 2004 Honda Civic, painted a color that was once silver but has oxidized to the shade of old bones. The interior smells like coffee gone stale and the particular must of a vehicle that has become a home because there is no other home available. The back seat is folded down. A twin mattress, foam, no more than 3 inches thick, the kind you can buy at a discount furniture store for $40, takes up most of the cargo space. A thin blanket. A pillow without a case. A backpack containing everything she owns in the world. Mia sits in the driver's seat with her hands on the steering wheel, and she counts her money. $2.17. She lays the bills and coins out on the dashboard, as if seeing them arranged this way will somehow add up to a different total. It does not. $2 remains $2. 17 cents remains 17 cents. The mathematics of poverty are immutable. She is 28 years old, but her face is 20 years older. Her hair is dark brown, almost black, tied back with a rubber band because she cannot afford clips. Her eyes are the color of honey, but they are hollow now, exhausted in a way that sleep cannot fix. She has worked 42 hours in the last 5 days, double shifts at the diner on 5th Street, the shelter on weekends, anything anyone would pay her for. She has not eaten since yesterday at 2 in the afternoon, and that was a half sandwich left on a plate at the diner, food that the manager said would have been thrown away anyway. She can make this money last. She is good at this now. $2.17 equals a gallon of gas if she can find an attendant who will round down. A gallon of gas equals one more day of work. One more day equals $4 in tips if people are generous, which they are not, because people who have money do not become generous when they see someone like Mia, they become uncomfortable. They see in her face what could happen to them if luck turns the wrong direction. Her phone buzzes. An old Android, 3 years old, the screen cracked in the shape of a lightning bolt. The message is from her manager at the diner. Don't come in today. Having to cut shifts. Sorry. She reads this message 3 times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something different. They do not. The foreclosure notice is in her backpack, crumpled and worn from being handled so many times it has started to fray at the edges. She knows it by heart. The house in northeast Philadelphia, the house her mother left her, the house she grew up in, the only permanent address she has ever known, was foreclosed on 18 months ago. Her stepfather Anthony Marchetti had taken out a home equity loan. Then another one. He had forged her signature on documents. He had drained every cent of her inheritance, $75,000 that her mother left her when she died 4 years ago. When Mia found out, when she demanded answers, when she asked for the money back, he had thrown her onto the street. Literally. He had packed her backpack, thrown it into the driveway, locked the door, and told her that if she came back, he would call the police and tell them she was breaking and entering. The car still runs sometimes. That is the only mercy. A friend from high school, Marcus, let her park it at his aunt's house for the first 6 months, until she lost even that when she could not afford the insurance. Now she parks in different neighborhoods, moving every 3 days so it does not look abandoned, so the city does not tow it, so she remains invisible. Mia starts the car. It takes 3 tries, the engine turning over reluctantly, coughing like something with bronchitis. But it catches. It catches and it runs and the dashboard lights flicker to life. She sits there with her hands on the steering wheel and lets herself cry. Not loudly. Just silently, her shoulders shaking, tears rolling down her face like rain she cannot stop. She cries for 4 minutes. Then she stops. She wipes her eyes. She puts the $2.17 back in her pocket. She drives toward the part of the city where she has learned not to ask questions about the people around her, where other cars are also running in parking lots at dawn, where the invisible become visible only to each other. She drives toward the YMCA on Cherry Street, where she will shower in 2 minutes or less using the day pass she paid for yesterday, where she will change into her work clothes even though there is no work today, where she will sit in the lobby for hours pretending to be waiting for someone, because they will not hassle you if you look like you belong there, like you are waiting. She does not know that in 3 weeks, a man with a scarred face and a cashmere coat will see her collapsed on a sidewalk and will set in motion a sequence of events that will dismantle everyone who has ever hurt her. She does not know that the child she will save is the reason his world has been burning for 7 years. She does not know that she is about to stop being invisible. All she knows right now is that she has $2.17, and a car that started on the 3rd try, and a shower that will last 2 minutes, and nowhere to go except forward. The November cold bit through the fabric of her jacket like teeth. Mia Vasquez sat in the driver's seat of her 2004 Honda Civic, parked behind a closed shopping center on the edge of North Philadelphia, her hands trembling not from cold but from mathematics that would not change no matter how many times she counted. $2.18. $2.18 lay scattered across the dashboard in quarters and dimes and pennies she had collected from the sidewalk outside the bus station. Quarters the size of hope. Dimes the weight of desperation. Pennies that meant nothing and everything. She arranged them in neat stacks, then rearranged them, as if a different configuration might somehow transform $2.18 into $125,000. It would not. The crumpled foreclosure notice sat beside the coins, the paper so wrinkled from being clutched in her fist for weeks that it had begun to tear along the creases. The numbers on that page were printed in a font that seemed designed to crush her. $125,000. 3 days. or the house her mother left her, the only thing in this world that had ever been hers, would belong to a bank and a thief wearing her stepfather's face. Anthony Marchetti had stolen her inheritance the way a magician steals a watch from your pocket. With practice. With confidence. With the certain knowledge that you would never prove it and that no one would care if you did. 2 months earlier, she had stood in that same house, in the kitchen where her mother had taught her to make sauce from tomatoes and garlic and thyme. Anthony had slammed documents onto the marble counter, and the sound had echoed like a gavel. He was a thin man with grey hair slicked back like he had just stepped out of a shower he had taken to wash away someone else's blood. His cologne was cheap and aggressive, a drugstore smell trying to cover something underneath it that smelled like rot. He smelled like rot because that was what he was. "You signed everything over, sweetheart," he had said, and he said sweetheart the way a snake says hello. The house. The accounts. Your mother's jewelry. All of it. See? He pointed at the signature line. That's your name. That's your handwriting. It was not her name. It was not her handwriting. She had told him so. She remembered the way her voice had sounded, thin and useless like a wire about to snap. "I never signed anything, Anthony. I never touched those papers." He had smiled then. Not a real smile. Something that showed his teeth without showing anything underneath. "Prove it," he had said. "Go ahead. Prove it." "Oh wait." He had paused for effect, letting the silence feel like a cup. "You can't afford a lawyer. You don't have $2 to rub together. And I have documents. Very official documents. With your signature on them. Your real signature, from old bank statements and utility bills. All very convincing to a court of law." The men had come an hour later. 2 men in suits that cost more than she had earned in a month. They did not touch her. They did not have to. Their presence was enough. They had packed her belongings into garbage bags while she stood in the hallway and watched them treat her life like trash. She had left with 3 bags and nowhere to go except down. Now, 2 months later, she was sitting in a car that smelled like mildew and congealed fast food grease, counting coins on a dashboard, wondering how long it would take to die from the weight of $2.18. The sun was not yet up. The sky was that color it gets just before dawn, not black anymore but not light either, a gray that looked like the inside of her chest felt. She started the engine. It coughed and sputtered and made a sound like something dying. She waited. She tried again. The 3rd time, it caught, and the engine turned over with a sound like a prayer someone had finally decided to answer. She drove toward the part of the city where other invisible people congregated. Where cars idled in parking lots at dawn because their owners had nowhere else to be. Where the forgotten came to shower and sit and pretend for a few hours that they had homes they were returning to instead of addresses they had already lost. The YMCA on Cherry Street had a day pass for $15 she had purchased yesterday using money she no longer had. But the day pass meant a shower, and a shower meant hot water, and hot water meant that for 2 minutes and 33 seconds, she could stand under something warm and remember what it felt like to be human instead of a problem that needed solving. She went through the motions as she had gone through them every day for 2 months. She showered in water so hot it made her skin ache. She stood under that shower head and let the heat soak into her bones because it might be the only warmth she would feel all day. She changed into her work clothes even though there was no work today, no shift scheduled, no reason to dress like a person instead of a person pretending to be a person. In the lobby of the YMCA, she found a seat with a view of the entrance. A book sat unopened in her lap, a prop, something that made her look like she belonged there, like she was waiting for someone instead of just waiting for time to pass. Staff members moved around her with the studied indifference of people who had learned not to look too closely at the waiting people. If you looked, you might have to help. If you helped, you might get involved. If you got involved, you became responsible. It was easier not to look. She sat like that for 4 hours. Her stomach made sounds like an animal caught in a trap. She ignored it. Hunger was old news. She had learned to read her hunger the way a sailor reads the ocean. She knew the difference between the hunger that came after skipping one meal and the hunger that came after skipping 3. This was the hunger that came after forgetting to count how many meals she had skipped. At 11 in the morning, her phone buzzed. An old phone, a flip phone from 2008, something she had found in a donation bin and charged with a cord borrowed from a stranger at a charging station in the mall. The screen lit up with a text from Mrs. Chen, the director of Safe Harbor Children's Shelter. It said, "Are you coming today? Sophie keeps asking about you." Sophie. The name moved through her like warmth. Sophie was 7 years old, which meant she had lived through 7 years of a world that had used her body like a trash can. Sophie had curly dark hair that matted easily because she was afraid of having it touched, and she had eyes that looked like they had seen things that I should never see. Sophie did not speak to anyone except Mia. To everyone else, she was a beautiful, silent, broken thing that everyone pretended not to notice. Mia texted back, "I'm coming. Tell her I'm coming." She drove to Safe Harbor in a part of the city where the buildings had more boarded-up windows than ones that opened. The shelter occupied a converted brownstone that had been painted a color someone had decided meant hope. Bright blue. The color of a sky that existed in places other than Philadelphia. Mrs. Chen was waiting at the door, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a posture that suggested she had been bent over children's problems for so long that her body had simply stayed that shape. "She's been waiting since breakfast," Mrs. Chen said. "She wouldn't eat until you came." Mia found Sophie in the reading corner, a small girl folded into a too-big armchair, a book open on her lap that she was not actually reading. When Sophie saw Mia, something in her face changed. Not a smile. Sophie had not smiled in the 3 months she had been at the shelter. But a softening. Like a door unlocking just enough to let someone through. "I waited," Sophie said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact delivered in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. "I know," Mia said. She sat down next to the chair, on the floor, so she was smaller than Sophie instead of larger. "I always come back." "Other people don't," Sophie said. "I know," Mia said again. "But I do." They sat there together while the morning moved through the shelter around them. Other children played. Staff members moved through the space. The world continued. But in that corner, under the window where the blue paint made the light look like water, there existed a small pocket of safety made of nothing but a woman with $2.18 and a child with nowhere else to go. At lunchtime, Sophie actually ate something. A sandwich cut into 4 pieces. Applesauce from a plastic cup. A carton of milk. She ate slowly, and she watched Mia while she ate, as if Mia might disappear if she looked away. "Do you have to go?" Sophie asked when the meal was finished. Mia wanted to lie. She opened her mouth to say something gentle and false. But Sophie's eyes were too aware for lies. She had lived through too much to be told comfortable things. "Yes," Mia said. "But I'll come back tomorrow. And the day after that. And every day after that until you don't need me anymore." "What if I always need you?" Sophie asked. The question broke something in Mia that had not broken yet. She pulled Sophie close, and the child let her, which meant everything had changed. Sophie had not let anyone touch her since arriving at the shelter. But she let Mia. Mia held her and felt her own heart splitting like a piece of fruit. She thought about her mother, who had died when Mia was 14, who had left her a house that was not hers anymore, who had left her with memories and nothing else. She thought about Sophie, who had never had a mother, who had only had whatever had happened to her before she appeared on these streets with no history and no name anyone recognized. "Then I'll stay," Mia said into Sophie's dark curly hair. "I'll stay." She did not know that 3 weeks from that moment, a man with a scarred face and eyes like winter would see her bleeding on a sidewalk and would set in motion events that would destroy everyone who had ever hurt her. She did not know that the child she was holding was the reason his world had been burning for 7 years, that Sophie was the missing piece of a puzzle written in blood and vengeance and a love so fierce it had turned into violence. She only knew that she had $2.18 and a child who finally trusted her, and the certainty that whatever happened next, she would not let this girl disappear the way her mother had disappeared. She would not let her become invisible. Mia's eyes opened to whiteness. Not the grey of shelter ceilings or the stained yellow of gas station bathroom fluorescents, but pure white. Ceiling beams of dark wood crossed above her, and the air smelled like cedar and wood smoke. She tried to move. Pain screamed through her left side, a knife wound wrapped in fire. The sheets were softer than anything she had touched in 2 years. Thread count higher than her monthly food budget. She was lying in a bed the size of her old bedroom, in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows showing an endless blizzard, snow falling so thick it erased the world beyond the pines. The door opened without knocking. He was tall, mid-30s, built like a man who understood violence the way most people understood breathing. Charcoal sweater, black jeans, hair dark and carefully arranged to look carelessly arranged. His face was all sharp angles, the jawline like a knife, cheekbones like weapons. But it was his eyes that stopped everything. Winter grey. The color of a sky before a storm. "Don't move," he said. His voice was low, careful, like someone soothing a frightened animal. "You took a blade meant for a child. 12 stitches. The knife missed your lung by 3 centimeters. Mia tried to sit up anyway. The wound screamed. She fell back into pillows that cost more than a month of her old rent. "Who are you?" Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. "Nicholas Rossi." He approached the bed slowly, deliberately, each movement controlled. "The child you protected." "Sophie. She's my daughter." The room tilted. Mia's mouth went dry. "Taken from me 7 months ago," he continued, sitting on the edge of the mattress like someone might sit beside a hospital patient. "My wife died. There was custody chaos, people who wanted to use Sophie as leverage. Someone took her during the confusion. I've had 40 men searching 3 states." Mia thought of Sophie's dark curly hair, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. Her refusal to talk about family, about before, about anything that mattered. "She never talks about her past," Mia said. Nicholas's jaw tightened. Whoever took her made sure she'd be too afraid to speak. "But you." He looked at her the way someone might look at a stranger who had walked into traffic for them. "You nearly died for her." He left her with pain medication that made the room soft around the edges. Through the window, she could see Sophie in another room, a spacious playroom with toys that looked expensive and new. A dark-haired woman supervised gently, but Mia recognized what that was. An employee. Someone paid to be there. The blizzard intensified through the afternoon. Wind howled like something trapped, snow piling against the windows in drifts that reached toward the sky. The lodge was isolated, cut off from the world. Mia could hear the occasional crackle of a radio downstairs, voices in low Italian, the sound of men who understood that waiting could be as dangerous as moving. Nicholas brought her soup at sunset. Not a staff member. Him. He carried the bowl himself, set it on the bedside table, adjusted the angle of her pillows with surprising gentleness. A man appeared in the doorway, stocky, Brooklyn accent thick as concrete. "Tony." His eyes widened slightly, seeing his boss with his hands on medical supplies. "Boss, I can get someone to." "I've got it," Nicholas said quietly. Not rude. "Just finished." Tony retreated without another word. That night, Mia couldn't sleep despite the medication. The room was too quiet, the pain too insistent, her mind too full of questions. She found Nicholas in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, rolling up his sleeves, making coffee like a man who had stopped sleeping years ago. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He gestured to a chair. "My mother died when I was 15, Mia said. The words came out without permission. Cancer. She fought for 3 years. Spent everything on treatments that didn't work. When she died, she left me a house. Clean title. Worth about $180,000. She worked for 34 years to own something." Nicholas poured coffee. He waited. Anthony Marchetti married my stepmother's sister. Started coming to family dinners about 6 months after my mother's funeral. He was charming. Helpful. He offered to help me understand estate taxes, investment opportunities, smart financial moves. Mia's voice was steady, which was its own kind of cruelty. He got power of attorney. Documents I signed thinking I was protecting the house. How much? Nicholas asked. $125,000. Everything. Transfer to accounts in his name within weeks. When I asked questions, he showed me documents with my signature on them. Forged, but perfect. By the time I understood what had happened, he'd already filed the foreclosure. 3 days to pay or lose everything my mother built. She didn't mention the phone call to his lawyer. The refusal to help without payment. The realization that she had no money for a civil suit, no proof that wouldn't be destroyed, no credibility against a man with lawyers and connections, and the willingness to smile while he stole. I had $2 in my pocket when they changed the locks, she finished. $2.18. That was 12 days ago. Nicholas's jaw worked silently. His hands were very still around the coffee cup. He's still there, Mia said. Living in my mother's house. Probably selling her furniture. Probably telling people he helped a struggling stepdaughter by taking over her impossible mortgage. Where is he? Nicholas asked. Philadelphia. Northeast corner. The house is at 4847 Ashton Drive. He nodded like he was memorizing coordinates for something important. The next morning, Margaret Harrington arrived despite the blizzard. A black Range Rover somehow made it up the mountain road while snow fell so thick it erased distance. She emerged wearing a fur coat that had cost real money, silver hair pulled back so tight it must have ached, eyes that calculated the value of everything they touched. She swept into the lodge like she owned it, kissed Nicholas's cheek with cold precision, then noticed Mia. And who is this? The woman who saved Sophie, Nicholas said. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone examining something found on the bottom of a shoe. How fortunate. Though one wonders what sort of person works at a homeless shelter. What were you before, dear? A maid. The word came out layered with contempt, the way someone might say disease or stain. Mia felt the old shame rise, the shame of small bank accounts and calloused hands, and knowing that to people like Margaret, she would always be marked as less. But she forced herself to meet those winter eyes, so much like her son's but completely empty of whatever it was that made Nicholas capable of kindness. A daughter who lost everything, Mia said. Margaret laughed. Sharp. Precise. Like breaking glass. Well, some people are meant to lose things. It's the natural order. That night, Sophie had a nightmare. Mia heard the screaming from down the hall, small, terrified, the sound of a child reliving something unspeakable. She moved despite the pain, despite the stitches pulling at her side, and found Sophie thrashing in bed, sweat-soaked, eyes open but seeing something else entirely. Don't let her take me, Sophie sobbed. Don't let her. She said Daddy didn't want me. She said I was bad. Mia held her. The child had not let anyone touch her since arriving at the shelter. But she let Mia now, clinging like someone drowning. They sat in the dark while the blizzard raged outside. Nicholas appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against hallway light. His face was stricken. Sophie cried into Mia's shoulder. The mean lady. The mean lady with cold hands. What mean lady, sweetheart? Nicholas knelt slowly, as if approaching something that might shatter. His voice was gentle in a way that suggested gentleness cost him significant effort. Sophie wouldn't say more. But her body was shaking, and Mia and Nicholas locked eyes over her small head, and something passed between them, the understanding that this child had been hurt in ways that weren't yet visible. Nicholas made a phone call downstairs. His voice, when Mia heard it through the kitchen walls, was lethal calm. Tony. I need everything on Anthony Marchetti. Philadelphia. Married into money 2 years ago. property transfers, bank accounts, phone records, associates. And I need Margaret's phone records. Every call. Every text. 6 months back. Silence on the line. Did I stutter? Nicholas asked quietly. More silence. Then, no, boss. I'm on it. But something in Tony's voice was wrong. Something that sounded like guilt, or fear, or the recognition that a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Nicholas hung up and stood at the great room window, silhouetted against white. Outside, the blizzard intensified. Snow fell so thick it seemed to be erasing the world, one white flake at a time. His hands were clenched so hard his knuckles had gone white as bone. The wind howled against the windows, testing the glass, and somewhere in the lodge, Sophie finally slept, and somewhere in his chest, Nicholas Rossi began the process of dismantling everyone who had ever hurt her. 3 days passed like held breath in the mountain lodge while snow continued its relentless assault on the windows and Nicholas Rossi made phone calls in the dark hours before dawn. His voice, when Mia heard it through the walls, carried the weight of a man who had finally found the thread that would unravel everything. On the third morning, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time, and Nicholas called Mia and Sophie into his office. The room smelled like leather and old wood, like power accumulated across decades. He sat behind a desk carved from mahogany, and on its surface lay photographs, bank statements, phone records spread like a confession written in numbers and dates. His face was carved from stone. Margaret and Anthony Marchetti have been working together for 7 months, he said, and each word fell like a hammer striking an anvil. Mia felt the room tilt, felt the ground beneath her shift into something unknowable. Your stepfather took $200,000 from my mother to hide Sophie after my wife died. To keep her hidden until Margaret could petition for guardianship and control of my entire estate through my daughter. Mia's hand moved to her throat. $200,000. The number hung in the air like a curse that could not be erased. Anthony took Sophie? The foreclosure notice was Margaret's signature on every document, Nicholas continued, his eyes never leaving Mia's face. The forged paperwork, the stolen inheritance, throwing you into the street, all of it orchestrated to break you, to make you invisible, to ensure you'd be too destroyed to ever recognize Sophie if you crossed paths with her. Margaret knew you volunteered at shelters. She counted on your desperation. Sophie sat rigid in a small chair, her small hands gripping the armrests. She did not cry. She simply stared at Nicholas with eyes that had learned very young not to trust the world. The rage that moved through Mia's chest was like a blade wrapped in ice. Not at Nicholas, but at the realization that her entire collapse, every night sleeping in her car, every dollar counted and recounted and never enough, had been orchestrated by people she had never even met. Her stepfather had not simply stolen from her. He had been hired to destroy her. That afternoon, Margaret Harrington arrived at the lodge. Nicholas had summoned her with a single phone call. His voice on that call had been perfectly pleasant, perfectly controlled, which was somehow more terrifying than rage. "Mother, I need you at the lodge. There are family matters we must discuss. Sophie is asking for you." The lie was constructed with surgical precision. She came in a black Mercedes driven by a private car service, wrapped in a fur coat that cost more than Mia had earned in her entire lifetime of working double shifts and collecting tips from people who saw her as less than furniture. Margaret Harrington was 62 years old but looked carved from marble, pale skin, silver hair pulled back so severely it seemed to hurt, lips painted the color of dried blood. Diamond rings caught the afternoon light as she removed her gloves. Pearls at her throat. A Rolex that cost $47,000. Everything about her whispered control, hierarchy, the absolute certainty that she was superior to every breathing thing beneath her gaze. Nicholas stood by the fireplace as she entered the great room. Flames roared in the hearth, orange and violent. "You took my daughter," he said. No greeting. No pretense. You hired Anthony Marchetti to hide her and destroy an innocent woman's life. Margaret didn't flinch. She removed her coat slowly, deliberately, as if time itself bent to her will. Sophie needs stability. She needs guidance from people who understand her position. I was protecting this family. You were protecting your control, Nicholas said. For the first time, her mask fractured. Rage flickered across her features like a flame caught in wind. Her voice dropped to something venomous, something that dripped like poison. You stupid boy. I built this entire empire after your father's weakness got him killed. His incompetence, his naive belief that honor meant something in this world. Everything you have, everything you inherited, exists because I made the hard choices. Choices he was too soft to make. She stepped closer to the fire, and in that moment, she looked like something ancient and hungry. And that homeless little maid? That broken waitress sleeping in her car? She is nothing. A speck of dust that the wind should have scattered years ago. I would crush 1,000 like her to protect what I have built. The words hung in the air between them, and Nicholas's expression did not change, but something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. That night, Margaret found Mia in the hallway outside Sophie's bedroom. Her voice was low, poisonous, calculated to wound in the deepest places. You think he cares about you? You are a charity case. A convenient hero narrative for his daughter. When this is finished, when she is secure and your usefulness has expired, you will return to that car you called home. And he will forget you existed. Men like Nicholas Rossi do not marry women like you. We both know what you are. Mia walked outside without a coat. The blizzard had calmed to light snow, but the cold was absolute, cutting like blades through every layer of clothing she wore. She stood in the darkness with her arms wrapped around herself, and for the first time in days, the weight of everything pressed down with full force. She had lost her home, her inheritance, nearly died bleeding into wet pavement. She had walked through the valley of the shadow, and now she stood in it still, and the whisper of Margaret's voice echoed, "You are nothing. You will always be nothing." She looked at her hands, red with cold, calloused from labor. She remembered her mother's voice from a lifetime ago, remembered the words spoken during one of her mother's own darkest nights, "We bend but we do not break." She thought of Sophie's small hand holding hers. She thought of Nicholas's face when he looked at her, a face that belonged to a man who had not known gentleness in 2 decades until she had arrived, broken and bleeding, at his feet. A light flicked on in the lodge behind her. Through the great room windows, she saw Nicholas searching, calling her name into the hallway. She saw Sophie's small silhouette, crying, pressing her face against the glass. Mia turned and walked back inside. The next morning came with federal agents moving like ghosts through fresh snow. 12 men in black tactical gear, FBI credentials, a warrant signed by a federal judge. But the warrant was not for Nicholas Rossi. It was for Tony, his most trusted lieutenant for 15 years, the man who had stood beside him through every war and every rise and every dark negotiation. "We have recordings," the lead agent told Nicholas, his voice formal and absolute. "Your Lieutenant Antonio Carmichael has been cooperating with federal investigators for 18 months. He provided information to Margaret Harrington regarding your financial structure and assets. He helped facilitate the transfer of funds to Anthony Marchetti. He was operating as an informant in exchange for immunity from racketeering charges." Tony stood in the great room as the handcuffs were applied, his face the color of ash. He looked at Nicholas with the expression of someone watching his entire world collapse into smoke. "Boss, I had no choice. They had me. They were going to charge me with." Nicholas said nothing. He simply watched as Tony was led out into the snow, his protests fading into the distance, and that silence was worse than any words he could have spoken. That silence meant death to everything Tony had ever built. But the FBI was not finished. At 6 a.m. in Philadelphia, federal agents moved through Anthony Marchetti's house like judgment itself. He answered the door in a bathrobe, his face going white when he saw the badges. "Anthony Marchetti," the lead agent said, her voice steady and relentless, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, forgery of documents, and accessory to kidnapping." Anthony collapsed to his knees on the porch, trembling like a cornered animal trapped in a cage of its own making. "I was just following orders. Margaret Harrington paid me. I have proof. Everything was her. She made me do it. His neighbors watched from their windows as he was walked out in handcuffs, crying, his dignity shattered as completely as Mia's inheritance had been shattered. Margaret's destruction came not with violence but with precision, with the systematic dismantling of everything she had spent a lifetime constructing. Nicholas did not kill her. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful for someone like Margaret Harrington. Instead, federal agents arrested her at the Philadelphia Society Gala, one of the city's most exclusive charity events, in front of 200 of the wealthiest people on the East Coast. Cameras flashed as she was escorted out of the ballroom, her fur coat and diamonds suddenly looking like the costume of a woman who had been exposed as a criminal. Federal charges stacked like a house of cards: conspiracy to kidnap, wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering conspiracy. Her assets were frozen. Her account seized. Every penny of the Harrington fortune locked by court order. The news broadcast played on the television in the lodge's great room. Margaret, in handcuffs and a prison jumpsuit, being led into a federal courthouse in Philadelphia. The reporter's voice was crisp and professional. Margaret Harrington, 62, faces up to 40 years in federal prison on multiple counts of conspiracy and fraud. Sources indicate the case against her is comprehensive and devastating. 40 years. She would die in a cell. Nicholas stood watching the footage with Mia beside him, their shoulders almost touching. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply stared at the screen with the expression of someone who had set a fire and was watching it burn exactly as intended. She will die in prison, he said quietly. Every day for the rest of her life, she will remember the daughter she tried to control. Every day she will remember that she lost. Meanwhile, Tony's own betrayal had destroyed him more thoroughly than any prison sentence could have managed. The FBI had used his cooperation against him, had extracted everything he knew, and then had arrested him anyway. His attempt to save himself through betrayal had simply ensured his total annihilation. 15 years federal prison, with no possibility of parole, no immunity, no mercy. The weapon he thought would save him had destroyed everything. Nicholas made one final phone call. Franco answered on the first ring. "Boss? Anyone else?" Nicholas asked. A long silence. Then, "No, boss. Just Tony. The rest are clean." "Good," Nicholas said. "Because the next person who betrays this family won't see a courtroom." He hung up. Outside the lodge, the snow began to fall again, soft and clean and absolute, covering the footprints of the men who had come and gone, covering the evidence of the war that had been fought in the darkness. And inside, in a room filled with firelight and the sound of wind against glass, Mia held Sophie's hand, and Nicholas stood watching them both, and something in his chest that had been cold for 20 years began, very slowly, to warm. The snow melted into spring, and with it came something neither Mia nor Nicholas had named yet. The mountain lodge transformed overnight. Wildflowers bloomed in the garden where only ice had existed weeks before, their colors bleeding across the stone walls like a painting of impossible forgiveness. Mia's scar had faded to a white line, thin as a knife mark on parchment, visible only when the light caught it at certain angles. She traced it sometimes in the mirror and felt nothing but gratitude. What changed everything was a manila envelope delivered on a Tuesday morning. Nicholas placed it on the kitchen table where Mia sat with Sophie, who was drawing pictures of mountains with purple crayons. The envelope was thick. Official. His expression gave nothing away, but she had learned to read him in the smallest movements, the tightness at the corner of his mouth, the way his fingers lingered on the edge of the table. "Open it," he said. Inside was a deed. Her mother's house in Philadelphia, cleared of every debt, free and clear. Below it, a settlement statement showing $125,000 in recovered funds. Not hers initially. Seized from Anthony Marchetti's accounts, from Margaret Harrington's frozen assets, converted into justice with her name on the bottom in precise legal script. Mia's hands trembled. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere between the knife and the blizzard. But something in her chest broke open, the kind of breaking that comes before healing. "I don't understand," she whispered. Your inheritance, Nicholas said. Your mother's house. Your life. All of it, returned to you. No conditions. No debt. Sophie looked up from her drawing. Does this mean my mum goes home? The words landed like a stone in still water. La mom. Not said to an adult. Said when Sophie thought no one was listening, when she whispered it into her pillow at night, when she was trying on the shape of the word to see if it fit. Nicholas watched Mia's face. She knew what his silence meant. He would not ask her to stay. He had decided that somewhere in the darkness of those last days, had promised himself that if she survived, if she healed, he would not trap her with gratitude or obligation or the weight of his own need. She would choose freely, or she would not choose at all. I'll visit, Mia said quietly. Every weekend. Sophie's face brightened. And you'll help me with my reading. Every weekend, Mia repeated, and she was speaking to both of them. The next 6 months unfolded like chapters in a book she was writing for the first time. Mia moved back into her mother's house, her house now, in a neighborhood on Philadelphia's edge where the trees were old and the streets remembered quieter times. She refinished the hardwood floors on her hands and knees. She cleaned out her mother's closet and found herself wearing her mother's cardigan on cold mornings, the way a daughter does when she finally understands that some inheritances are not about money at all. She founded the House of Hope in a converted warehouse downtown, 3 blocks from where she used to sleep in her car. The space filled slowly with women like her, discarded, broken, invisible to everyone except to each other. Mia hired a counselor. She applied for grants. She wore professional clothes that fit properly, clothes that did not come from charity bins, and when she looked in mirrors, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Nicholas attended her ribbon-cutting ceremony on a Thursday afternoon in June. He stood in the back of the room, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, his presence a quiet statement that he had chosen to be there. Franco remained outside with 2 other men, watching the street, watching everything. Always watching. Mia introduced him to no one. They did not need introduction. The power moved between them like current through water. Fresh flowers arrived at her house every Tuesday without fail, white roses, like snow in the summer. She began baking Sophie's favorite cookies in her mother's kitchen and bringing them to the lodge every Saturday morning, arriving before the sun fully crested the mountains. Sophie would run to her, always running, always certain that Mia would catch her, and Nicholas would stand on the porch watching them, his coffee cooling in his hands. They took Sophie to the park one afternoon in late July. The 3 of them walked through the grass while children played on equipment and families pretended not to notice that the tall dark man and the woman with the quiet eyes and the small girl with his features were not quite any family they recognized, yet were unmistakably a family regardless. A stranger called them a beautiful family and Mia did not correct her. Neither did Nicholas. One evening in October, 6 months after the knife, they sat on the lodge porch while Sophie slept inside, her breathing audible through the open door like the sound of the world continuing its slow, steady turning. The mountains were losing their summer green, preparing for another winter. Mia could feel it coming, not yet, but soon. That particular cold that announces itself weeks before arrival. You never asked me to stay, Mia said. Nicholas did not look at her. His jaw tightened the way it always did before he said something true. I never had the right to ask. She turned in her chair so she faced him fully. What if I wanted you to? His eyes moved to hers. The mountains had turned to shadow behind him, making his face harder to read, but she heard it in his voice when he spoke. You built yourself back up. You are not the bleeding woman I found in the rain anymore. You are someone who deserves a choice. A real choice. Not gratitude dressed up as love. And if my choice is you? He stood abruptly, walked to the porch railing, gripped it with both hands like it might anchor him. 20 years of vengeance had carved him into something dangerous and controlled. She understood now that these things were not opposites, that the most controlled men were the most dangerous precisely because they had spent decades learning to direct their darkness with precision. But there was something else underneath, something he had buried so deep he had almost forgotten it was there. I watched my father die when I was 17, he said without turning around. Built everything on the need to destroy the men responsible. I built an empire on blood and revenge and the code that family is loyalty and loyalty is silence and silence is survival. I do not know how to be soft. Mia stood and walked to him. She took his hand and placed it against her chest, over her heart, and felt it racing beneath her ribs like something wild trying to escape. Then we will learn together, she said. He turned and kissed her as the sun descended behind the mountains, orange and gold and bleeding into purple at the edges. His kiss was careful at first, like he was learning a language he had never spoken. Then it was not careful anymore. His hand came up to her face, and she felt the tremor in his fingers, the absolute rarity of him losing control for even 1 second. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet, and Mia realized she had never seen Nicholas Rossi close to tears. I love you, he said, and it sounded like a confession, like a vow, like something breaking and finally breaking through. 1 year later, summer had returned to the mountains. Sophie sat in the garden drawing pictures of clouds while Mia stood at the kitchen window, Nicholas's arms around her waist, her hand resting on the small curve of her belly where their daughter was learning to move in the dark and warm. The non-profit had expanded to 3 cities. Mia had been interviewed by 2 major publications about her work. Her mother's house had become a home filled with laughter and plans and the ordinary miracles of a life rebuilt from nothing. Anthony Marchetti was serving 12 years in a federal prison in upstate New York. Margaret Harrington had lasted 6 months before a heart attack took her, alone in her cell, the guard said, dying the way she had lived her final years, in complete isolation, forgotten by everyone she had ever controlled. Tony's final appeal had been denied. 40 years ahead of him, the rest of his life measured in prison meals and the particular regret that comes from choosing betrayal. They visited her mother's grave together that afternoon, Nicholas and Mia and Sophie, who held both their hands as they walked through the cemetery. Sophie placed flowers on the grave, pink ones, because she had decided pink was the color of hope. Mia touched the stone and whispered something only her mother could hear. Nicholas stood behind them, his hand on Mia's shoulder, and in that moment, the Mafia boss was simply a man standing beside the women he loved. That night, after Sophie was asleep and the men had gone back to the city, Mia and Nicholas sat by the fireplace. The fire crackled and shifted, casting moving shadows across the room. He asked her the question that had been living in his silence for months. Do you ever regret it? Taking that knife. She touched her scar through her shirt, the white line that marked the moment everything changed. Every scar tells a story. This one says I was brave enough to protect someone who needed me. And it led me here. So no. I do not regret it. Nicholas pulled her close. Outside, the world continued its turning. Inside, by the fire, something that had been impossible was now simply true. Family is not always bound by blood, Mia said softly, speaking into the quiet, but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. And when you find those people, the ones who pull you from the rain, who protect you when you are broken, who stand beside you while you rebuild, you hold on. Because that is not just family. That is home. If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that family is about choice, not just blood. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about love, loyalty, and second chances that you will not want to miss. Drop a comment and tell us, have you ever met someone who chose to be your family when you needed it most? We read every single one. Thank you for watching, and remember, the storm does not last forever, but the people who stay through it, they are forever. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.